doing, Democrats? Now, are we ready to flip Florida blue this year? And next year, and the year after that, and the year after that? I gotta tell you, first of all, Chris, thank you so much for your leadership of this great organization. It is good to be here. And excuse me in advance for my voice. I live in Tallahassee, as y'all know, and we got so much pollen I can't even begin to tell you. So the allergies are acting up. But I can't thank y'all enough for allowing me to come back down here and just say a word of hello. I want to thank Bob, our former president. I don't know if Bob made it back in the room, but he met me outside. We all give it up for Bob Jansen for his great leadership. Obviously, our state committee man, Bob Berg. Where are you? Right here, state committee man. And I left Chris Anderson, your state committee woman, down in Orlando, where Democrats all from around the state of Florida are convening right now in Orlando as we try to plot our path to victory for 2020. It is critically important. It is critically important, and I'm loving the fact that this room is a sea of blue. It is, without a doubt, my favorite color. And now we got to do the difficult work of actually flipping this state that direction. I want to begin by saying, in my 2 years on the trail working to become the Democratic nominee for governor, and obviously our race to become governor, you all were among the first stops that I made the first month that I entered the race. We came to the villages. And we came to the villages because in spite of everything that I had been told, that it's all Republican and there are no Democrats, I was proven, and the rest of the state was proven wrong. You all are the strongest Democratic organization that we have in the state of Florida. The strongest by far. Now you may live in a sea of red, but you all are a blue dynamic dot in the middle of it. And we need you to continue to grow in your numbers and continue to grow in your strength and continue to grow in your activism, because it's going to be that kind of energy and effort that is going to be pivotal for us flipping the state of Florida blue. A couple of things I want to mention just about this last race that we made our way through. When I came to you 2 years ago as a candidate in the Democratic primary, nobody thought we had a chance of winning that primary race. Frankly, I don't know how many of y'all thought I could do it. But I will tell you this much, your well wishes powered us forward. And even though we raised the least amount of money of any candidate on the Democratic side in the primary, raising $6 million to my combined opponents, more than $96 million raised and spent. It was the hard work and the labor and the regular everyday people within our party who showed up and allowed their voices to be heard. In the general election, a state like Florida, and I know some of us are newly adoptees of the state of Florida, others have reconfigured ourselves in the state, but just a little bit of history. The state of Florida in gubernatorial elections were projected to turn out about 6.1 million voters in that election, in that gubernatorial election this last 2018 November. Presidential elections come close to near 9 million voters. Obama's 2008 race, we were in the 8.5 million range. Well, y'all, in the state of Florida, in a gubernatorial non-presidential election, 2018, we turned out 8.5 million voters. We reached presidential level, near presidential level turnout in the state. We had over 500,000 voters who were registered to vote in 2016 who didn't show up but showed up in 18. Black voters in the state, for the first time in the history of this state, voted their share of the population. But there was some, and I'll tell you, even though I didn't get to cross the finish line as the victor, 33,000 votes short out of 8.3 million cast in the race for governor, we got closer than any Democrat has in the race for governor in 24 years. But that's not good enough. Right? And we all know that that's not good enough. There's a recording artist that we know named Brandy. And Brandy sings this song that almost doesn't count, right? And so I want to be the first to declare that almost doesn't count. When it comes to 2020, almost will not be good enough. We all know what's at stake in this country. All you got to do is turn on your Twitter feed or turn on the television screen, listen to NPR radio, even though they give you the sanitized version of it. It's bad in Washington, D.C. We know we've got it bad with this president. But the president knows something that I hope that we know well here in the state of Florida. And that is the race for the presidency of the United States. If Donald Trump wants a re-election, that re-election requires that he achieve Florida's 29 electoral votes. He cannot go back to the White House without Florida's 29 electoral votes. So for anybody who would say that Florida is a red state, I want to correct the record. I don't believe we're a red state. I don't think we're a purple state. I think we're just an unorganized state when it comes to that. Right? That's what I think our challenge is. I think we're unorganized. And so the work we have to do between now and election, November 2020, is get organized. And guess what, y'all? It's completely possible. Now, I ran this race for governor. I gave everything that I had. Myself, my family, our team. We had, at one point in the primary, our staff consisted of 3 people, right? And then in the general, we swelled to over 500 people in this race. And we weren't perfect on the mechanics, right? You could be perfect and still not win, but we weren't perfect on the mechanics. And we are searching hard for what are those things that we can do better. But one of the lessons that I learned that was really critical and instructive to me is that in 2008, when Barack Obama was on the ballot here in the state of Florida, Democrats had a voter registration advantage over Republicans of over 700,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. When I was on the ballot just 10 years later, that advantage had shrunk to fewer than 250,000, a precipitous decline. And something else happened over that period of time, and I don't want to offend anybody in this room because you all are the good part of this trend, but there are some not so good parts of this trend. And that is when Barack Obama was on the ballot in 2008, the 65 and older white vote represented 25% of the electorate. When I was on of the total share of the vote in 2008, when I was on the ballot, that number of 65 and older white voters represented 35% of the total electorate. Now, usually we celebrate those numbers because they're from New York, and you got the right version of the 65 and older, but you are living in the epicenter of where some of those trends are shifting, where we have voters who are coming into the state who are more conservative and without being prompted are helping to re-elect Republicans in droves. The good news is that there are 4 million eligible unregistered voters here in the state of Florida. 4 million eligible unregistered. And a good deal of those folks are our voters. And so when we made our way through this race, and we looked up and realized that after we paid all of our bills, that we had some money left, I had to ask the question, what is going to be the best and highest contribution that I could make, given those resources, given what we built, 4 million votes collected on behalf of the Democratic side. The fact that we opened up 1 million text conversations with unlikely voters and turned about 500,000 of those folks out to vote. The fact that we had built this tremendous database of information and resources. I didn't want to be like some of the others who have come before me that when we lost, we went and surrendered into the history books. When you know better, you do better. And what I know is that we have an opportunity, if we put our mind and our will and our resources to it, to get out there and to increase Democratic registration in the state of Florida. And so what we committed to doing was taking those resources, my time, energy, and effort, and trying to raise the amount of money that's going to be necessary to fund groups on the ground, Democratic clubs, the FDP, county organizations all across the state of Florida, groups like New Florida Majority and Organized Florida, and other groups that have core competency with our voters on the ground to give them the resources that they need to help us to flip Florida blue. So we've committed And I hope that you will join us in this effort to getting out there, moving across the state, and registering and re-engaging 1 million new voters and re-enfranchised voters here in the state of Florida. I believe we can do it. I believe that we can do it. And guess what, y'all? Guess what? If we fall short of our goal, say we only get 25% of the goal, 250,000 new voters in the state of Florida can be the difference between who becomes president, whether we flip the Florida House, the Florida Senate, whether we flip this state again in 2022, when the governor's race and the cabinet and the U.S. Senate, Marco Rubio, is up in this state in 2022. If we do our work between now and 2020's November election, I believe that we're going to make the biggest difference, not just here in the state of Florida. I think we're going to make the biggest difference for the country, because we're going to be able to give the country back to some common sense and decency and respectability, but we're going to have to work for it. We're not going to be able to take this thing for granted. We're not going to be able to short-circuit our way to victory. It requires us getting back into the field in the way that Democrats used to do. Getting connected to our base again. Talking to the voters about the issues that matter. One of the things that I said throughout the course of the race, one of the things that I said repeatedly, and my grandmother was my first reminder of this. She told me, boy, it ain't about you. Right? She was a constant. Sometimes it didn't feel so good to hear. Right? But she told me it wasn't about me. In fact, my grandmother, and I shared this when I was with you all before, a woman who had 16 children. I know it's crazy. She was from southern Georgia. It was workforce back in the day. My mother was the baby of those 16 kids. My grandmother never worked a day outside of the house, but influenced everything, inside and outside the house, through her rearing skills. But my mother was a school bus driver, my dad was a construction worker, and I'm one of 7 kids. But because my mother and father's jobs would take them away so early in the morning, they would load all of us up into a car and drive us to my grandmother and grandfather's house in Miami, where we would sleep a little bit longer before they would get us up and ready for the day. And my grandmother would have this mantra where she would say, before we would cross the threshold of the door, she had a ritual of doing 2 things. One, she would take her bottle of olive oil, which she called blessing oil. And she would take that top off and dip that one finger in that olive oil, and then she would build a cross on my forehead. It was her way of sending me out into the day with a blessing, that no harm would come my way. And then she would say, boy, go to school, mind your teachers, get your lessons, and one day bring it home. And then she'd say, bring it home for your mama and for your daddy, for your little brother, for your little sister, for the boy down the street who I don't even like. Right? Bring it home. And I didn't always know then what my grandmother was communicating, but I would come to learn that what she was saying was, it wasn't just about me, that it was about us, the collective. And the truth is I actually believe very much so in the collective. While my wife and I are pouring everything that we can into our 3 children to raise them up in a way that we and they can be proud of, we're also concerned about the kids who they're going to sit next to in the classroom. We're also concerned that the teacher who stands in front of the classroom is paid a wage that she can live on, so she's not stressed out as she's teaching. We're also concerned about not just our health care and our health plans, but for those who don't have access to it because they're showing up in emergency rooms, spending more money in those emergency rooms, not their own, but those of us with insurance. And our premiums are increasing year over year over year. I want my kids sitting next to healthy other children, right? That's part of the collective. Part of the collective is also decency and respect for other people's own individual and personal decisions. For instance, the fact that the legislature and the governor and the Congress and the president has no business in making decisions about a woman's own reproductive health. None whatsoever. Part of the collective is being respectful to each other, right? And rearing up children in communities that recognize differences. And don't think that simply because we have a disagreement that you're my mortal enemy. That kind of decency and sensibility politics has got to be restored. And y'all, we have a chance to do that beginning right here in the state of Florida. Now I want you to know, I wanted to be governor better than anything. But I will tell you, not winning that race, I could have made a choice. And one of those choices could have been to ride off into the sunset. And I'm sure my wife would have loved this next part, which is go get a job and make a lot of money. And somewhere and out of the spotlight. But what we said is that we have an opportunity to return to our organizing roots. That's not who I am. When I ran and I talked about those issues that we all feel so passionately about, it wasn't just for the sake of winning the race for governor. I believe those things to this day. And if you believe those things, then you can't just give up and walk away. You got to figure out a way in this process how we do the difficult work so that we can win power and then transform policy, that then transform communities and neighborhoods and households and children's and our next generation, right? If we believe in this stuff, we got to be willing to do the work. So I will tell you, it is not easy putting yourself in the middle of crosshairs, right? Some of you all may have heard they're now investigating my governor's campaign and my political committee, and just made it through an ethics set of complaints where they levied 5 charges against me, and because they couldn't prove them, dropped 4 of them. And then I agreed to pay a penalty for accepting a gift and failing to report it, even though it was done unknowingly. Right? So I recognize that the slings and the arrows are going to come. But I'm telling you, I'm prepared to take all the slings and the arrows so long as we all are willing to do the work of registering, engaging, turning out voters, and flipping the state of Florida blue. That is our work. That is our work. That is our collective work. And so y'all, I know that it can be difficult. Y'all are in the villages. I get it. Right? I've seen the golf carts moving around. I've seen the MAGA and the Trump and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how you do it, but bless you. Right? Bless you anyway. But there are some people out there, I gotta believe, are disaffected by what they see. There are some true patriots who may not share our political stripe, but put the value and the virtue of this country ahead of their own party affiliation. That's why it's so important, especially in places like this, that we're willing to open up conversation and to ask some folks and to challenge in some ways that, yes, it can be uncomfortable. But y'all, it's got to be uncomfortable when you look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. When you see what Donald Trump is doing to this country and the way he is representing us on the global stage, that is not who we are. But the truth is that they will win this state if we don't get busy doing the work. Trump knows what's at stake. That's why they're kicking off their campaign for re-election. Yes. Not in New York, not in Wisconsin, not in Philadelphia, not in Michigan. They are kicking off their re-election campaign for the presidency right here in the state of Florida in just 2 weeks. Right? They're kicking off their Latino effort. Not in Nevada, not in California, not in Arizona, but right here in the state of Florida. They know what is at stake. The question is do we know what is at stake? Well, y'all, I know what's at stake, which means that I am here today to ask you for your continued support, for your work, for your labor with the party and also with our efforts to get out there, register, and re-engage as many voters as possible. I am proud to share that over the last month, we have now raised almost an additional $800,000 to help fund this work. We were proud. We were proud. We were proud just a few weeks ago to give $100,000 to the Florida Democratic Party so that we could set up a mini grant program and fund local DECs and clubs and organizations to assist us in this work. And as I committed to the party chairwoman, more is coming. We then gave about $400,000 away to local grassroots groups that are working in communities of color and poor communities and with young voters so that we can do the difficult work of getting them engaged and organized. So we're serious about this work. We are deadly serious about this work because we are clear about what is at stake. So if y'all are with us, let me see those signs. Let me hear you say 1 million votes. Let me hear you say 1 million votes. Let me hear you say 1 million votes. All right, I believe you. Now, the only thing I need, Sam, is for you to bring me a cell phone, or you, Daryl, because I gotta get a selfie before we get out. Some of y'all may remember we took a great selfie together 2 years ago, and now since I'm gonna make it a regular pattern to come on through the villages before I retire my mother here. Actually, she's not. She couldn't take that many Trump signs. She won't be choosing the villages. But can we get a big smile and some signs up as we take a couple of photos? Let me see you standing with those signs, everybody. Let's let the rest of the Democratic Party know that Democrats are alive and well right here in the villages. So a quick video for those of you all who are looking on the other side. We are right here in the villages, one of the most Republican areas in the state. But I also want you to know that this is the most powerful Democratic club in the state of Florida. And together, we are committing to flipping Florida blue in 2020. Is that right? God bless you and take care.
All right.
Thank you all so much for the opportunity. Madam President, thank you again for the opportunity.
Primaries gets all the way to the general. In fact, it's happened once in my life. Andrew Gillum.